Hello and welcome to Lightcast webinars. It's really great you joined us today. We're really excited to be joined by Lightcast's EVP of Global Business Unit, which is Andy Derman. He has a special guest with him, but I will let him introduce her. We're looking at the Global Talent Playbook today, which is very exciting. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please put them in the question box on your control panel, and we will endeavour to get to those at the end of the presentation. If we do run out of time, then we will follow up afterwards via email. You will receive a follow-up email, so keep your eyes open for that, because that will have your recording of today's presentation and your slides. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Andy. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us today. Very excited to be diving into some recent research we've released globally, the Talent Playbook, and very excited to have one of the key authors, Layla O'Kane, joining us. Layla's based in the US, but has recently returned from a presentation tour of the Asia Pacific region, amongst other things, and gets herself out and about into the wonderful world of labour market information globally. So hello, Layla, thanks for joining us. It's great to welcome you.
Hi, Andy. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good stuff. And we'll hear a little bit more from Layla shortly as we go through. So thank you very much to regular watchers, viewers, tuner-inners of our webinar series, and it's great to welcome you back, and I hope you find this content interesting. For anyone who's brand new, welcome. You are very welcome. Welcome to the community. Just a little intro for those that maybe are a little new to who we are as Lightcast and why we do what we do and why we like to share the content that we're about to share for you. And it's really down to our mission as an organization globally. We are highly motivated and focused around unlocking new possibilities in the labour market. As we know, the world of work is changing rapidly, and Layla's going to tell us a little bit more about the latest trends that we're picking out. And so ever more, we need good insights to drive better decisions as they relate to any interaction within the labour market, whether that relates to the world of education and skills development, through to job seekers, through to regional economic planning, and also, of course, employers who are seeking to unlock new talent pools and to drive their businesses forward. And so our goal is to bring together the best insight and knowledge that we can glean from that insight together to help that ecosystem thrive. And we do that through a range of services that are primarily focused around our different ways of defining the labour market and discovering the labour market from different data sources, ranging from official government statistics that help us understand the building blocks and stock of labour, through to a wide range of big data sources that really help us understand employer hiring activity, as well as professional profiles and what we can glean from that daily activity right across the globe to build insights about what employers are seeking, where the talent can be found, and how the world of work is really working for us. And we deliver that data around the world through various mechanisms, through software services, through data integrations, and through research activities as well. So that's a little bit about us. More on to today's topic then. So we've recently released, as you may have seen, and if not, you'll get a nice sneak preview here, the new Global Talent Playbook, which Layla has been an instrumental part of. And today we thought it would be helpful to maybe just dive into the topics a little bit and pick out a few of the key trends, hopefully inspire you, if you haven't already read the report, to go and access that report, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But also, hopefully kind of seed some ideas and thinking in your own heads as key agents in the labour market, and key partners on our mission, think about how can you take these types of insights and take them back into better decision making within your personal life, as well as your organization and your business life. So very excited to welcome back Layla. Layla, come and join us. Here we are. Thank you very much, and appreciate it. So you're going to just sort of walk us through, and I'm going to attempt to try and keep up with the slides. Just some of the kind of main highlights, and I might throw a few questions in just to help clarify some points as we go as well. So I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Excited to go through this with you. So I think the first thing to note is just for this Global Talent Playbook, Andy mentioned we have a bunch of different data sources that we like to use here at Lightcast, including public data sources, LMI from government sources, job postings and social profiles. And I just want to mention that a lot of the work we did in this report focuses on job postings, trying to get that signal from what are employers looking for, what is the sort of the demand side of the market asking for, and that's kind of how we did a lot of this analysis. So the first thing I want to look at is a couple of sort of big trends that are affecting many different jobs, many different types of industries and occupations. And the first one is remote work. So I work remotely. Here I am in my home office in Brooklyn. I think a lot of people have been thinking, well, maybe remote work will kind of decrease or decline steadily because we're not necessarily in the sort of depths of the pandemic anymore. And there's been some media buzz about maybe employers asking people to return to office. But what we've been seeing so far in the US is that in general, remote work is here to stay. We've seen it continue to increase and kind of level off. And we did actually this week, I looked at the first quarter or first couple of months of 2023 just to see kind of what was going on. And we are seeing a little bit of a decline, but not a very fast one. And so kind of our expectation is that in general, remote work is here to stay. Maybe not at the level that it had been in the pandemic, but at a pretty substantial level, especially above what it used to be. And that's particularly the case for jobs that require a university degree. And so that it's grown particularly for those, and I think that will continue. And we're seeing pretty similar trends in many European countries, right? So on the right-hand side in this bar chart, you can see that we've seen really substantial growth in remote work across all of this set of European countries. And I think we're expecting to basically see similar trends to the US and much of Europe when it comes to remote work.
Quick question, Layla, actually on this. Something that I'm certainly picking up a bit more in news chatter is hybrid work. So where it's made sort of the halfway house, the number of days in office. I think it was Amazon recently sort of stated that it was going to demand its employees work in the office 3 days a week. So how does that play with the trends that we're seeing here? And actually on a more practical level, how does that play into kind of the sorts of data that we're using here? Are we kind of categorizing hybrid as remote, or is that a separate category altogether?
Yeah, so we are categorizing hybrid as remote. So we're saying anything that we think is sort of remote is remote here. That being said, hybrid makes up a much smaller proportion of postings than the ones that are explicitly remote. It's much smaller. I don't have the numbers exactly, but it's not really driving this trend. I also think that you have to remember that in a posting, employers are essentially kind of upfront committing to doing something, but it's possible that this is kind of a lower bound for remote work, right? They might not put it in their job posting, but let's say I go and apply for a job and I say, hey, this job is based in San Francisco. I live in New York. Can I stay? Can I be fully remote? A lot of employers will still say yes to that. They still have sort of arrangements that they're doing behind the scenes. So we're only looking at employers that are upfront kind of committing to a remote work environment, even if there are more employers that are kind of doing this in practice.
That's really a useful clarification, because I think there is a danger sometimes, particularly if you haven't spent a whole lot of time diving into job postings data, that we take everything for read, right? And actually the reality is this is just a signal of intention that we can infer plenty from, especially looking at relativity and trends, but does not always equate to an actual outcome in that respect.
Yeah.
So so what might be mentioned remote could be as much that's kind of the cool hip way of getting the biggest talent pool going, whereas if you get the choice to hire someone locally, you'd prefer that, but you don't want to limit yourself. So it certainly kind of gives us a sense of direction, if not necessarily the specificity of the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I want to mention on remote work is that I think a lot of people think of this being really focused in high-tech occupations or industries, very much a digital type of remote work. And that's definitely true. So you can see that in the US, we looked at top occupations that allow for remote work, again, explicitly in job postings. And we're seeing things like web developer, computer programmer, mobile app developer. So those kind of pass that sniff test, if you will. But the fastest growing occupations are actually from a much broader range of career areas or occupation families, including things like a medication aide, a credit analyst, a tax manager. So these are occupations that aren't necessarily working in a software company or at a tech company, but are growing in other sectors like healthcare, um, or logistics and supply chain sectors. And so I think growth in remote roles really indicates that remote work is not going to stay in kind of the bubble that we think of it in, but will probably expand beyond that.
Yeah, interesting. And I suppose it's the work of the tech companies and the tech workers that have therefore facilitated remote working for all as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. We've got all these technologies like GoToWebinar that allow us to speak with people all over the world at the same time. So that's great.
There we go.
The second trend I want to talk about that has been affecting a lot of jobs across the globe is green jobs. And of course, there are many ways to kind of think about what is a green job, and we can get into that. But the main takeaway here is just that we've seen really substantial growth in demand. And the U.S., the U.S. is not the gold star standard for green jobs globally, right? We've kind of lagged behind some of our European counterparts on these issues, but it is growing really substantially in the U.S. as well. And then on the right-hand side, you can see green job growth by country. And I'll just note that while growth might not look as intense in these European countries in the bar chart, you can see that the levels are just much higher to begin with, right? So we're seeing a much higher percentage of overall jobs in the labor market considered to be green in European countries than we are seeing in the US.
Well, I'm just very grateful that you're tuning into national stereotypes there.
If the shoe fits,
Yeah, no, absolutely. But great. Yeah, it is clearly a universal topic as well, and a bit like the whole tech and AI discussion, I think can only go in one direction. And just as an aside, whilst this is a bit of a headline view as part of the general kind of labour market outlook activity that the report presents, we have done in the UK some more specific work on defining the green economy and looking at trends and different aspects of the green economy there, and I am pretty confident that we'll be diving ever more into that topic and lifting the lid on that as we unlock our European data and data in the Asia Pacific region as well. So I'm sure there'll be more coming, but good to see the headline trends here are very interesting.
Yeah. And then the last section, you kind of alluded to this, but the last trend is looking at AI, so artificial intelligence, and kind of what jobs are growing across the globe within that sphere. In order to look at this, we look at a bunch of different sort of AI skills, and we see which jobs are looking for those skills, and we count that as an AI job. So that's something like machine learning or robotics or natural language processing. So we're looking at not only companies that really focus on AI as their bread and butter, but also companies that might have a small division that is doing something related to AI. And so it includes a kind of broad range of types of AI jobs. But we're seeing that globally, the US, UK, Spain, and Canada are really growing quickly and are currently sort of leading the charge in terms of their total AI share of postings. And we have done some more work on this. Specifically in the UK, we have a pretty nice sort of interactive dashboard that you can dive more deeply into where these jobs are, both regionally and also in what industries, and kind of a little bit of information also about the salary premiums that they pay, which is cool. So if you're interested in that, I think it's aiskills.lightcast.io that has more information.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm sure as Debbie sends out the email following up this session, we can provide some links to that. I hosted a webinar with your colleague, Yulia, who we both went through that along with our partners at Infograte, who helped to build that infographic. So there's a resource there to dive into to check back on. Question for you, what's the story of New Zealand? They seem to be a bit of an outlier here. Do you have any sense of what's driving that?
I think part of the story is that New Zealand is a small country and they have a smaller number of just overall job postings than other places. And I know you wouldn't think that would necessarily affect the numerator, right? So, okay, we know that it's a small country, but why is it a lower share? I think in general, it just tends to mean that trends that we can see clearly happening in other countries take a little bit longer to pick up on in New Zealand. So it might be the case that this is happening, but it's just kind of still getting started, and we're waiting to see that be borne out in the data.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But even so, the trend, whilst the magnitude maybe it looks a little different, the trend speaks volumes, doesn't it, right across the piece?
Absolutely. Yeah.
There we go.
The next section we looked at are some skill trends. So specifically within jobs, what's going on with skills. And this is motivated by some work that we did earlier last year, working with the Boston Consulting Group and the Burning Glass Institute to try to understand sort of broadly in the labor market what's going on with skills. And what we found was pretty surprising, I think, and it was just that skills have changed substantially within jobs in the last 5 years. So if you've been in the same job for 5 years, your skills have changed, right? The things that people are demanding of you have changed. And on average, just looking at the top 20 skills within a job, we've seen an average change of 37%. So that's a pretty substantial amount of skills that we see have changed. And so we kind of took this and said, well, let's look for 2023, let's try to understand what are some of the skills that are driving that change specifically for this year. And what we saw is that there are some of these global trends kind of showing up in the skills that we looked at. And so things like remote work have shaped this skill growth. So you can see that in telecommuting, for example, or virtual collaboration under those common and human skills on the left-hand side. You can also see that digital skills have really substantially grown, and that goes hand in hand with remote work to some extent, but it also is sort of separate from that. So we're seeing things like platforms like Jira Align or Microsoft Power Platform, which kind of allow for people to work on their digital jobs more efficiently, produce data visualizations more easily. Those have grown substantially. The other thing I want to mention here that it's not in the slide title, but I think is important, is that there's a lot of sort of what I would describe as initiative skills that people are looking for more so than they were before. So on the left-hand side, you can see like growth mindedness or adaptive leadership and entrepreneurship. And that's not a typo. Entrepreneurship is sort of running your job or your universe like you are running a business. So thinking strategically about what you should work on, even as an individual player in a bigger company. And I think that kind of speaks to the fact that with remote work comes this kind of need for a little bit more of a self-starter approach to work. You know, maybe you can't rely so heavily on a team if you're a little bit farther away from them, or on watching your manager do their job and learn directly from them. And so you kind of need to take a little bit more initiative in your own role. And I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that's
the other fun one is TikTok, right?
I was just about to jump in and say, please. Someone's got to ask. Come on, TikTok.
I mean, we really are seeing substantial growth of people, especially social media managers, right, needing to know how to operate TikTok. It's become a substantial platform. We'll see, these are based on US trends, so we'll see how this develops, especially as sort of different regulatory processes work or don't work well with TikTok. So we'll kind of see how that goes, but it has seen really substantial growth.
Yeah, and I suppose when you look at the job titles associated, it suddenly makes more sense. This isn't necessarily about virtual collaboration, maybe growth mindedness, I don't know, learning dances perhaps, something like that, but it's another platform, isn't it, to reach an audience. And and we see certainly on the social media side, that's an established practice. It's nothing new. I don't think we're surprising people with that, but what is changing, and probably at a pace, are the different vehicles with which these people are able to reach their audiences. And so fascinating to see the pace of change there as TikTok grows. No doubt that has a commensurate decline somewhere else as the older platforms maybe decline in their wane in their popularity as we go there. So yeah, very fascinating. And you mentioned that this is US data, but I think from a conversation we had, this is not too dissimilar to what we're seeing in our other countries. We pulled these out specifically for the report, but it does really reflect on a general trend as well as a specific one in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then the next section on this is looking at just specific titles. So this is looking in job postings and seeing what are some job titles that we're seeing growing or existing now that weren't really popular a few years ago, right? And a lot of these are reflecting, I would say, two of our other big trends that we've sort of talked about. One of which is green jobs, right? So there's a sustainability consultant or energy and sustainability manager, for example. Those are some green job related titles that are emerging. But we're also seeing a lot of hybrid roles. So when I say hybrid, I don't mean hybrid mobile developer, although that's important. I also mean things that are kind of combining what I would say used to be two different types of roles and are now kind of being put into one. So let's take global talent acquisition manager, for example. Probably you had a talent acquisition manager, but now with the idea that you can recruit talent from the whole globe or a bigger part of the globe than you used to be able to, especially with remote work, you now have a global talent acquisition manager or a global learning and development manager. Similar idea with data scientist consultant, right? So you probably knew you had a data scientist and you probably knew you had consultants. Now you kind of have both together, where it's somebody who has that technical capacity and that background in data science, but are also able to kind of come in, think strategically, maybe communicate the results of a model out to other stakeholders. And so combining some of those more consultant lenses with that technical capacity. And I think this is a trend we've been seeing in general throughout the last few years of jobs, is people sort of combining roles in new ways. And I think we're going to keep seeing that.
That's super fascinating. It's a great one to call out, and of course has some genuinely real implications in how we serve the labour market. So just thinking about probably the very many folks on this webinar who work in the education and skills arena, whereby understanding how the world of work is changing like this, and roles are mashing together to some extent, and skills are being brought from different places into one setting, is pretty profound for thinking about how curriculum is designed or can be adapted or combined, especially with the trend of really starting to break big qualifications down into its constituent parts, and digital badging and micro credentials being an example, and thinking about how you put them back together in ways that help either adapt to the changing labor market, or from an upskilling and reskilling perspective, in your stat on the fact that there's just so much change even within the same role, really continues to reinforce that growth market, edutech growth market, that are needed to kind of help people make those transitions, not just through different jobs, but actually within the same role.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
Yeah. And then the last section I wanted to share today is looking at some wage trends and sort of what these trends mean for how employers are trying to recruit and attract talent. So the first one is on wage transparency. And I know that different countries have kind of different norms about this. But in the US, we've seen some substantial growth in employers including an advertised wage or a salary or an hourly wage on a posting itself. And some of that has come from some regulatory changes. So there are some states that have passed laws saying employers over a certain size have to include this information. But I know in the UK, it's already substantially higher than this, and that's kind of a norm that's been established. But we are seeing that become more of a norm in other places, especially in the US and also in Australia and New Zealand. We did some looking there. And so I think, partially as we're moving towards a little bit more of a global talent labor market, people are going to be more incentivized to put these wages on. And this also allows workers to understand exactly what they're kind of getting themselves into, and helps employers attract talent because they can see this is exactly the wage that I would make. I can compare this maybe to another employer who's also posting a wage, and I can see, how much more money I would make at this job. The other section here is we've seen in the US that wage growth has increased substantially for low wage workers, and then also for non-white workers. And so those graphs are a little bit small, but they're using some public data from the Atlanta Fed here in the US to understand, if you look at wage growth over time by quartile of wages. So if you put the people with the lowest wages in one bucket, and you put them into 4 different sort of buckets, which bucket has grown the most. And we've seen that happen the most with the first quartile, which is the lowest range of wages. And so that's saying good things about sort of income inequality and potentially sort of narrowing some of that gap that we've seen has grown a lot in the last few years. We've seen that gap narrow a little bit. And then a similar idea for non-white workers as well.
Fascinating. It's very interesting.
And then I think the last section here is just, there's been so much talk about labor shortages in the last few years. I think people kept thinking they were going to disappear, and they haven't really, at least in some sectors. And so we're looking at some other ways in which employers are trying to attract talent and kind of combat labor shortages in signaling to potential employees that they will have certain benefits or offer them certain things that will entice them to apply. So one is tuition assistance. So, supporting them on a certain amount of tuition that they will provide towards a degree or towards just coursework. And we've seen substantial growth in that, especially among non-degreed roles, right? So roles that often attract talent that don't have a university degree already, supporting that tuition assistance. We're seeing an increase in retirement benefits, and I know that this differs across countries, right? The way that governments approach retirement, but in the U.S., that's often really employer-centric, and we've seen a lot of employers start to advertise that policy in postings, even if they already had it. Just the fact that they're pushing it out there means that they're kind of trying to combat these labor shortages, right? And then the last one is sign-on bonuses. So this is something like bonus to start or bonus to sign on, and we've looked at some of that, and especially, again, in non-degree roles, we've seen an increase in that. That's going down a little bit now, and that's not super surprising. We had a sort of a peak of labor shortage issues going on earlier at the end of 2021 and early 2022, and we've kind of come down from that peak, but you can see that we're still elevated substantially above where we were pre-pandemic levels. And I think as labor shortages continue, we'll continue to see some of these tactics that employers are using to recruit talent.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. And just looking on the sign-on bonus rate, whilst the degree hasn't necessarily had the big boost, it seems to be a consistently growing picture, which suggests a foundational change there. Maybe, as you say, a degree of the reset that's been happening, and certainly in the US, but other countries. In the short term, we've seen sort of short-term activity, but still returning to something that is significantly higher than what it was before, which can only be, a promising and opportunistic thing and great thing for employees, as you say, particularly if we're thinking about wage inequalities and trying to narrow some of those gaps there as well. So fascinating.
That's right.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Layla. It's good to share your wisdom on some of the headline trends there. So thank you very much for walking us through those. Much appreciated. And the report that we're referencing, you can get for free. Just head across to lightcast.io, and you'll see plenty of links through to the Global Talent Playbook, so you can dive into more of those trends that Layla's been sharing, and some of the background and some of the further context that we pull out there. So be sure to go there and identify, go and find that report and download it and have a little look, and feel free to point your friends and colleagues to it as well if you think it's helpful there. So thanks for the work you've done to build that, and thanks for sharing some of those headline insights.
Thanks for having me. That's great.
Good stuff. So talking of resources, so head along, go get that the playbook, and I'm sure links will be provided in the follow-up email. I want to point you to a few other resources as well. So if you find this fascinating and you want to maybe dive into a little bit more information, then we do have a couple of resources. One I've got on the screen here, which is our European Insights tool, which you can access via the Lightcast European web page, or europeinsights.lightcast.io link there. So we've published a dashboard that you can dive into and just pick out a few highlights. It kind of hints towards some of the things that we've been just talking about across key European countries. So if you want to dive in a little more, you can get access to that, unlock some deeper insights, and there's more information coming and deeper information for Europe coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. Haven't put the link up here, but again, I'm sure we can circulate if you're in the Asia Pacific region and you're most likely playing catch up on this one rather than watching live. Although if you are watching live, fair play, thank you very much, well done. Yeah, we have the Great Reshuffle dashboard available via our APAC website, which you should be able to find if you flick the switch to the APAC website, and that again dives into some local trends associated with some of the changes that we've been seeing across the Australia, New Zealand and Singapore labour markets as well. So some resources there if this has fascinated you and you want to dive in maybe to more specific localities. Hopefully that inspires you to check those resources out, all available for you to dive into. And of course, as I mentioned up front, if you really want to get hold of all of the datas and to do this kind of stuff for yourself and really dive into it, then of course our commercial services are there to allow you to do exactly that. We also have a webinar coming up, apt given the topics here. So this is one that we're focusing, I believe, from a UK perspective, but I'm continuing to dive into the topic of the green economy, which I mentioned. We've done a fair amount of work on, and we'll be bringing to other regions as well. So on Thursday, 2nd of March, we have a webinar about continuing to understand how we can spot and identify and therefore plan accordingly for the emerging green economy. So that'll be a good one to check out. We will also be having another one of these corporate webinars in a month or so, and we will be circulating details in due course. So I think that's everything we wanted to cover off today. Nice timely one there. Of course, feel free to reach out and get in touch if you do have any questions. Just before I close down and say goodbye, I suppose I can throw it back to you, Debbie, to ask if we've got any questions that have come through the audience at all that we can answer or attempt to answer, especially while we have the brains of Layla at our disposal. So any questions at all?
There's only one which is really about the green jobs, funny enough. Green jobs have come up a lot in this report and others. I was wondering what is classed as a green job.
Great
yeah,
question.
I can speak to that a little bit. So in this report, we kind of took I would call it a pretty narrow approach to defining green jobs. And we looked specifically at jobs that ask for some key green skills, things like solar panel installation or wind technology, wind energy technology or something like that. So I would call those, a kind of the inner set of green jobs, let's say. We've done some other work and maybe the follow-up work in the UK on green jobs will speak to this, on looking at what are some green enabled or green enabler jobs, so things that are kind of maybe not the core of green jobs, but a little bit more on the outer rungs. So you could imagine that, a administrative assistant at Tesla, is that a green job? Maybe, because they're working towards sort of a green endeavor, right? Even if their function isn't directly involved in green technology. So this report takes a pretty narrow view, only looks at the jobs that are specifically requesting some green skills. But I think we've done some other work that takes a broader view.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And I recall the webinar that myself and Duncan gave last year, I think it was, where we dived into that topic and really picked out, as you were just highlighting there, kind of as with anything in the labour market, there's never a clean, specific definition. It kind of depends on how you look at things. So we kind of flagged the fact that there are green industries, so industries that are very specifically associated with sustainability, green roles, job roles that are specific, but also green skills, and that actually the definition tends to be a blend of all of those, based on exactly what you described. And one of the things we certainly found was what we coined was the greenification of the labour market, in the sense that the skills, the green skills, are becoming more. We find them in wider and wider areas over time, and so it's just a natural development in the way that tech skills have become now commonplace in pretty much every role. The anticipation is that we're probably heading in that direction, but it tends to be led by particular industries and then specific roles, and eventually kind of starts to become more of a standard practice as well. So yeah, good question. Not a specific answer in general, but certainly to this report, and hopefully the upcoming webinar, as well as previous research that we've done on this, can be helpful to build that out and tease that out a little more.
Just as a note, Andy, a lot of these past webinars, they're all on our YouTube channel, and I will include the link to the YouTube channel in the follow-up. So keep your eyes for that, and that will be a good reference point. So thank you, Andy.
Maybe in slightly different colours to the current version and some names, but definitely good resources to go and find for sure. So good. Well, if that's that, then thank you very much. Appreciate the question. Appreciate you guys joining us. Thank you, Debbie, as ever, for hosting us so ably and managing the webinar. And thank you, Layla, for joining us from across the pond through the powers of technology to help us dive into some of the key trends we're seeing for 2023. And I'm very grateful for the work that you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.